Leadership. One of the most important aspects of leadership is communication. And one of the most important aspects of communication is storytelling. That's why I'm so excited to mention the Stories with Traction course with you. In this course, you will learn how to be a great storyteller. I share concepts with you on how you can boost sales, enhance your internal communication and marketing, and create a vibrant company culture. If you're looking to build a story bank for your organization and utilize a framework to persuade more effectively, go check out the course in the show notes, the Stories with Traction course. Now, on to the podcast. Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. In a world of trendy business theories, unproven methods, and phony experts, we need to push back on the status quo and ask, what are we missing? What do great leaders have in common? What are the reoccurring themes? Why do some companies fail while others succeed? I'm excited for today's conversation because I want to dive into that. Today, I'm joined by Don Schmincke, who is a strategic organizational performance researcher and has spent the last 30 years working behind the scenes and training over 7,000 CEOs. He is a growth advisor, author, and keynote speaker. Welcome to the show, Don.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. I know you're extremely busy. You're quite frequently in the air, so I'm glad that we had a time to schedule this so we could talk for sure. I just want to start off right out of the gate. Speaking of being in the air, so I read that you tend to fly about 250,000 miles a year, which is just staggering. What airline do you fly?
Oh, it changes because a lot of frequent flyers, when you're traveling at such a high rate, certain little things can cause a problem. Like I was on United, I was like a 1K for decades, and then all of a sudden the upgrades went away. It was instead of being like number 1 or 2 in the front of the line, I was number 27, and I kept calling saying what broke. So I ended up going with Alaska and their thing with American. So that's what I'm with right now. But I do fly a lot of Southwest because it's convenient, and if you're only flying for an hour or two, it's fine.
Sure.
But for long-term trips, it's hard because you don't get the seat room and the the meals that you're looking for.
Sure. No, I was curious. That was more a question for me. So I fly American Airlines. It's kind of default because I fly out of the Philadelphia airport. Yeah. They have a main hub there. And as you know, the last few years, flying has not necessarily been a luxury experience. There's been a lot of change, a lot of disruption. So it's interesting the creative ways that we've had to shift to try to figure out how to make it work. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
No, sure. I get it.
So speaking of flying, you've flown all over around the world, speaking with CEOs, speaking with leaders, understanding what are some doing that are working, what are some doing that are not working. So I definitely want to dive into that. As you've done your research, your processing with leaders, has there been reoccurring themes that have come up time and time again, where if someone were to say to you, this person has these attributes, or this person has A, B, and C, you can almost know right out of the gate that they are a great leader or they're a leader that's struggling?
Good question. A lot of the books and research we've done on leadership has been in varying environments. My first book was on an ancient samurai training program written like 700 years ago. And it was really a matter of how they develop leaders. They correlated very well with how we are or should be developing our leaders too. And so part of what I got out of that research was an area of what they call the evil spirit, but we today call the ego. So that led us into looking at how to transform executive teams to higher performance. And by performance, I mean to increase speed in decision making, speed of execution, speed of problem solving, and the ability to adapt. And we learned a lot from these ancient texts as to how they did that, that had to unhook the ego. And that ended up allowing some neurological and anthropological research. I was at Johns Hopkins. I left MIT, so I was at Johns Hopkins at the time. And I find that that ends up being sort of a consistent theme throughout history is, are they driven by the evil spirit? And because those that are get found out pretty easily. And I find that followers tend to mock them because they know that they're operating from that space. They're making themselves look good. They think they're always right, et cetera. So I think being able to unhook that biological phenomena is really powerful for a leader to be trusted and followed. Other areas come up. A lot of it depends. I think levels of complex thinking. Some of the work from the psychiatrist, Dr. Elliot Jacks, is important in terms of some people can only think at certain levels of complexity. And he had this whole thing mapped out. And when I do my workshops with executive teams or I do my keynote speeches, I find that this model tends to get a lot of attention and interest. And people rush out to buy some of his books on his research because we think that everybody's got potential. But we found out from the psychiatric models that no, they don't. In other words, you have potential for a certain level of thinking. But if you go past that, you kind of now become handicapped. You're not able to function. So, like, for instance, some people can deal with looking out 3 to 5 years. They can run a strategic project. They can look at the big picture, connect the dots. Other people can only look at maybe 3 months or 1 month. And it's hard to expect a person who's really competent at execution within that short time frame to expect them to have a conversation that looks out 3 or 4 months. So structuring organizations around this psychiatric modeling of the brain has become really, really helpful as we've taken companies and double their size, triple their size within a few years. This model is one of those that we use probably consistently to see, is everybody in the right place? Is everybody in the right meeting? And so I think that's helpful. And sometimes we do run into CEOs that are frustrated. They feel like they're being sucked into operations too much. And usually when we look at that, we find out underneath of them somewhere there's a weakness in their team. So they end up doing someone else's job. And until we call them out on it before. And when I do these speeches with CEO groups and everything, you see the pain look on the faces when I bring that question up. It's like, how much time do you spend getting sucked into operations? And like all of a sudden their heads just start, going back like, oh my God, you had to ask that question. But the point is it's up to you to put people at the right level. And when I wrote High Altitude Leadership with Chris Warner, it was getting involved with mountaineering, gave a really great model because there's only certain levels of altitude some people can handle. And when you go above that altitude, you start having altitude sickness. And it's very unpredictable. But when I present this model and I overlay it with Dr. Elliot Jack's research, it's like perfect. Because the point is, are we moving people to higher levels where they can't function? They can't breathe. And we really need to keep them at the levels where they can be functional. So all of this ends up sometimes being political and sucking speed and time out of execution.
Sure. So let's talk about this altitude sickness, because you had mentioned, so there are a lot of people that are good at executing the here and now, maybe upwards of 3 months, but then there's the individuals that can really dive into a 5 to 10 year strategic plan. So my guess is you need both, right? You need both the ones that can do now and the future. How do you empower leaders that might, back to your point, that ego piece, they might be figuring out how to keep their egos in check. So they're already dealing with that. And then now they're trying to figure out how to get the right people, not only on the bus, but the right butts in seats on the bus, to coin, I guess that was Jim Collins, the good to great. What do you do with a team like that? What should be the focus? Should it be the now till the 3 months, or should it be more the long-term strategic approach? What do you recommend to leaders as far as their team makeup is concerned?
Well, it needs to be depending on the level of thinking. And so, for instance, if you're a CEO and you have an executive team, they all better be thinking out 3 to 5 years or more, because otherwise you're going to be in a meeting. You're going to be looking at future trends or challenges or threats to the business, shifts in the industry, and you're going to have somebody in the room thinking like, wait a minute, we just need to rewrite the telemarketing script, or wait a minute, we need to just have different brochures, or wait a minute, we need to change the website. And you'd be like, what? You're looking at them like, what are you talking about? But they're in the wrong meeting. I mean, you do need to do those things, yes, but that's a different meeting. That's an ops meeting. That's a meeting that's more tactical or operational. So I find that because we don't structure our teams to the level of thinking needed, some of these meetings become really sabotaged by this level of mix of thinking, and it can be a problem. Like, for instance, a lot of times I'll train about 700 CEOs a year, and then I'll do a number of workshops inside companies or keynotes. And in each case, when there's a level of C-level executives in the room, it's sort of, they realize like, oh, maybe this is causing my problem. Because if I'm, we're having so much politic happening. A lot of it's from tactical conflict, not strategic. What's happening is there's strategic unclarity. There's just the lack of strategic clarity causes tactical conflict. So when I go to look at their strategic plans, they're shocked when I point out to them, this is not everybody, but I'm thinking probably over 80%, maybe 90%. When I open up their strategic plan, it's not strategic. So when you look at the data rates on failed strategic planning systems, and most of them fail at 90%, when you go back and look at the scholarly research done on it, I find, why is it failing? Why is strategic planning failing so much? And I find out that it's because most strategic plans aren't strategic. They're tactical. So that ends up being like a clue that maybe we're not doing our strategic planning properly. So about 20 years ago, when I was at Hopkins, and we're looking at like what's missing, like why are we not doing it that way? And that was part of the problem. I mean, a lot of it is because what we call tool seduction. We get seduced by our tools, and a lot of our tools are analytical. And the problem is we think like that's how we're going to do planning. So we have a SWOT analysis and this analysis and market analysis. But I found out that wasn't it. Like, that was causing the failure of strategic planning, because I was looking at these companies that are not supposed to survive, and they end up rising up to dominate their industries. And I was curious of this pattern. So as a researcher myself, I'm thinking, wait a minute, this company starts off, all the management consultants say they're not going to make it. All the thought leaders say, they're violating this and that. And so, and all the industry experts say, don't worry about that small Texas airline. They're not going to make it out of Texas. But then all of a sudden, the company grows to dominate the entire market capitalization. I mean, and all of a sudden, all these experts and consultants shut up. They just shut up. They stop complaining about this company doing it wrong. So I was curious, like, how did Jeff Bezos, when everybody said he's not going to make it? And what was everyone else missing? And they ended up getting slaughtered by ignoring it. I was curious, and what we found out, it was because we're using analysis and best practices and all that, and that's great for tactical execution. It sucks for strategy, because strategy is more around outmaneuvering the enemy, and it's about intuition. And yet, I haven't seen any strategic plans that invoked intuition.
Wow. All right, there's so much wisdom in what you said. I love what you said. Lack of strategic clarity leads to tactical frustration.
Mm-hmm.
That is a lot of leaders' frustration across this country and the world. You mentioned tool seduction. So let's talk about that a little bit more, because you mentioned, I saw somewhere that you had written that a lot of leaders get sucked up into this program of the month syndrome. It's like that new flashy program.
Yeah.
Have you seen this? I mean, this I almost feel like the last few years this has become even more prevalent, where it's the program of the month, and it's because so much is changing with AI and new tools that everyone again is focusing on these tactics. But do you feel that in the last few years that has radically accelerated?
Yeah, I think that we were wondering, like, if it's so obvious when we look at our ancestors, we look at our biological makeup as leaders, our evolutionary design as a species, why we keep forgetting that it doesn't matter how many tools you throw at the problem. By tools, I mean all the books, all the systems, all the, we need goals, we need metrics, we need structure, we need processes, we need systems in place to, that's great. You do need those tools, but we focus on those tools that they're going to make us win, and they don't. The best way to pick up a good series of best-selling business books is just go to the liquidation auctions at a bankrupt company. Not only did they have all the best-selling books on their shelves, a lot of them hired the authors. So I call that a clue. It's science. We call that a clue. It's like, wait a minute, what is this? Shouldn't be happening. So we did more research and found out why, what was going on. And the thing is we found out that tools are great. We need the tools, but until we alter human decision, it's a total fail. In other words, until human behavior changes or the decisions begin to shift, you're not going to get different results. So we throw tools at these problems and we want to get better results. But at the end of the day, it doesn't. I mean, we just have a bunch more books, and we had a bunch more consultants come through. We had a new TEDx talks we all watched. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't alter human decision, you're not going to get any different results than you've had. So when we went into the ancient world and looked at Alexander and Cleopatra and Gandhi and Genghis Khan and Caesar and some of these CEOs dominating their world markets, it was really around altering beliefs of humans. So we found that the thing we're not teaching in our management training programs, either in our MBA schools or our internal institutional courses in our companies, we're missing the point that we need to be teaching about belief management. So when we go into the issues, and I usually have a group, like if I do a group of executives, I'll have them dump all their issues on a flip chart. And I'll say, how many of these issues are because of humans? And they're all like, nod their head, like all of them. I said, but if humans were doing what you expected, how many issues would you have? And they would mostly vanish. So I said, let's look at that, because if we talk about anything else, it's just a waste of time. How do we alter human belief? And when we got into this, I was doing the book with Chris Warner, who's probably the top rescue climber in the world. I was climbing with Chris in the Andes, and we got this book idea because NBC was going to film him on his third attempt at K2, which is the Death Mountain. So wow. It's got like a 10 times higher death rate than Everest. And so NBC couldn't find a cameraman. They were all busy at the
I'm sure.
So Chris self-filmed it, and it was really, I think it was nominated for like 11 Emmy Awards or something. It was a fabulous film, but in the process, we were doing the book live. So while he was on the mountain, they were linking him via satellite to me, and we wrote the book live. Now, what's the whole point of tool seduction? The bodies he's pulling off of mountains, and he's pulled a lot of bodies off of mountains, are clutching their tools. They thought the tool was the salvation, and they couldn't make it, and they had all the right tools, but they ended up dying. So frozen humans dead that are on dead-on mountains probably are clutching a tool somewhere. And I said, Chris, so are companies. Dead companies are also clutching their tools. They're clutching their best practices. They're clutching their new sales program. They're clutching their new system they put in place, but they're all dead. So I said, what is it about us clutching our tools? And we found out that it was because of the human instinct for safety. So what that means is that we tend to use tools because we think they're going to make us safe. And to figure that out, which tool we need, we use analysis. So we find that analysis is useful for us, but it can become a problem. So we like to analyze the world, and from that we can control it, we can understand it better, and it's that control that's important. So I need tools to be in control. I'm in control, I'm safe. So that's why we have 35,000 business books published every year with a failure rate of 90% implementation. And I don't know why no one was talking about this. I mean, the data is published, but it was like no one was mentioning. I trained 700 CEOs a year, and I say, has anyone told you to do this before? And they all like shake their heads. You're the first person that's actually.
Wow.
And I show them the data. I get online and I say, here's where it is. So, but the point is, this seduction was fascinating to me, in how established companies were outrun by these small startups that were told they were going to fail. And it turns out, I think, that we're missing belief management. And that's in a different domain than analysis. That's in a dangerous, suffering, painful, risky domain. So naturally, we don't want to go there because we have no control. And that domain is called art. So we don't teach art.
Sure.
And that's the
Wow.
problem. That's the problem.
Wow.
Because
Wow.
when you,
There's so much power in what you said. So people clinging to their tools. So there's
yeah,
a new tool that is emerging right now. Well, it's not new, but it's the most popular tool, so to speak, right now, and that's AI technology, right? A lot of people
yeah.
are interested in how to utilize AI. How do you foresee people clinging to the tool of AI at the destruction of their own businesses? Are you concerned
When,
about this new phenomenon?
well, in each case, I mean, sometimes like we get called in to do rescue operations with a company that's failing, or the stock's dropping, or the sales are down, and we get called in to transform that organization and get it working again. And in each case, it's what we find is that we need tools, but what the question was they didn't ask themselves is one of many questions, but an important one is: are we using our tools, or are our tools using us?
Wow.
And the problem is, in most of the dead companies are the ones that are failing. The tools are using them. They're not using the tools. So when we get in there and we change that belief and have them reassert how they're going to be using their tools, things begin to change dramatically. And that saves a lot of dead companies and dead climbers.
For sure. So this, are we using our tools or our tools using us? More than
Right.
likely, there's going to be a lot of companies that cling to that AI, the new, whatever the new app of the month is. And it's going to be to the detriment of those strategic plans that you mentioned are not really that strategic because they're focused on those
Right.
tactics. So it could potentially help companies, but ultimately it could be to many companies' detriment.
Yeah, and tools are cool. I mean, look, I'm an MIT geek, so I love tools. But the thing is tools should serve us. We shouldn't serve them.
Sure.
And that's why, when you drive from beliefs and you be able to see, what are my beliefs about my market segmentation, and why have we not challenged that? And who's our real enemy? We think it's our rival, but maybe it's not. There's a dozen other arrows that could take us out. And then how do we win? Do we just want to? Are we filling in the blanks here? Is this just some sort of strategic plan where we fill in the blanks and that's it? Like, how's that going to allow us to outmaneuver the enemy? And so I think we get so seduced by tool problems that we forget to ask these questions. Like there's a great book that came out, Traction and the EOS system, and a lot of clients are using that. But they say, hey, we have a strategic plan. I'm like, no, you have an operating system, which is what you should have. That's helping you become great and more efficient. I get it. But I don't think that's strategy. I mean, because I don't care how effective your operating system is from your 8-track tape manufacturing plant, you're not going to sell any. You're dead. You know what I mean? So so I think we need both, but for some reason, strategy seems to be the lost one. That's the lost area. Because when we get in there and we tear apart a strategic plan, it's like, guys, weren't you thinking about this? And it's obvious when we say it, because it's like, oh my God, you're right. We didn't even think about that. So I think we need to reinvent strategic thinking in a new way.
Sure.
And, we need our operating systems. We need our tools. But what did one anthropologist? Because anthropology really opened my eyes to this whole thing. But one said, a fool with a tool is still a fool. And I was like, I
Wow.
get it.
Okay, that's
I get it.
powerful. I appreciate that. So speaking of foolish, what is a universally accepted business principle that you fundamentally disagree with?
Oh God, how many? I've done so much with exposing myths, and I've had some really great coaches in the past that I was trying to figure out what to do. Like Mark Levy, he was Simon Sinek's coach that helped pull Simon into his Start With Why
Sure.
thing. Was uh, and we ended up seeing a lot of these myths. And I ended up, in fact, I got a book coming out. The end of all, let me do a shameless plug here. I got
There
a,
you go.
I got a, it's basically called Winners and Losers, and this came out of Mark's coaching of me, because we teach a lot about winning. We don't teach a lot about losing. And if you can lose powerfully, that's exactly what the greatest entrepreneurs know how to do. But we don't teach this. And so we thought, let's release this book. And in the book, we dispel a number of myths that are there, and some of the myths are like what we talked about. Is my strategy really strategic, or is it just tactical? Are leaders, are followers really following the leader? Because that's another thing we teach wrong. We teach that a follower follows a leader. I'm like, well, how does that explain all the assholes getting followed?
Sure.
Hey, when Apple started funding our helping us with our creation research through Cameron Lugman, who was pioneering that, I see, they wrote books about Steve Jobs, and it's like, wait a minute, this guy violates everything we teach in our business schools, and he creates the most powerful company in the world. Why has no one asked that question? Why? How did he do that?
For sure.
I think that's the question everybody should be asking. How did he do that? By violating everything we teach. And this is what led us to looking at, General Patton, and I think even Forbes did an article some years ago on, do you have to be a jerk to be a great CEO or something crazy? But as I was looking at this, I began to realize a pattern. We think followers are following them, and they're not. But the followers are following are something we call the compelling saga. We stole it from the Vikings. The compelling saga. Like, what is that story? What is that next pass ahead of you? The next challenge that's so formidable that everyone believes they need each other to achieve it, and they're willing to do two things we don't teach, but we desperately need in our cultures: the willingness to suffer and sacrifice together. And people are like, "Oh, that's so politically incorrect." I said, "No, that's what winners do. They organize to suffer and sacrifice together to capture the cause, because we're so focused on happy employees and self-esteem, and everybody gets a participation trophy. It's like, come on, that's the most dramatic social failure experiment we've had."
Sure.
I said, if you want to know what makes people happy, what makes people happy is winning. And you get a team that establishes bravery and honor, and they're willing to suffer and sacrifice. And I'll put them up against any happy employee team any day of the week.
Sure. Sure.
And so, but this is all ancient stuff. It's not new. But why we're not teaching it anymore, I don't know. But when we go into corporations and we do this, the bottom line impact, the balance sheet impact is just phenomenal. It's beyond anything that we're able to achieve. So that's why, a lot of our clients stay with us for 10 years or more until they sell the business or something. We just love doing that with human groups that are willing to learn and willing to get to the next level. So, yeah, so that's my long-winded answer to your.
No, I appreciate that. So you brought up a thought in my mind I want to unpack with you. So there's this wave of millennials coming into leadership positions, at least across the United States. Do you see major differences with millennials and Gen Xers on how they lead? If so, is there any cause for concern regarding where millennials are in leadership positions? What are your thoughts generationally speaking regarding leadership?
It's interesting because every generation has a problem with the previous generation.
Sure.
But when we get back to leadership, it's all about humans, and our DNA has not changed that much. And we're 2 million years old in our current function, and we'll probably be this way for another 2 million years. So the same patterns exist. We may have a different style of leading, but I see a lot of millennials have some sort of vision or purpose. And so that's great. So you're creating the story that you should be creating. People are going to follow that story. They're not going to follow you. By the way, you don't have to be an asshole, I'm saying, but if you're a nice guy too. But but creating that story and your impact in the world, I think, is something that we've been doing for thousands of years. They may have a different way of doing it, or maybe not. A lot of these companies start off and all of a sudden become powerful, and they start becoming like what we normally see in a great company. They're resilient, they're adaptable, they're listening, they're changing when they need to. They don't get stuck, we hope, in their current belief system. But I like that. When I go back over thousands of years, it's like, look, I don't care what generation you are. Humans are going to follow the story, and they're going to follow the culture you create. And the culture you create has little to do with the posters on the wall and the speeches you give. The cultures you create has come from your triggering tribal grouping instincts in humans. And that's not going to change. And what does that look like? Symbols, rituals, magic. By magic, I mean the magic moments and the mythologies of our tribes. And whenever we've been able to induce this in companies, things took off. People started aligning. So they may have a different style, but I think they're still going to use symbols, and I think they're still going to use rituals, and they're still going to use magic, and they're still going to have a powerful story to follow.
Sure. Wow. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you
Sure.
so much for your time today. I very much appreciate our conversation. I took a lot out of it. I know listeners probably took other aspects, but the three things that I got the most out of this, Don, was I really appreciate what you mentioned regarding ego. That ego is so powerful when it comes to leadership, that you mentioned that the ancient samurai actually potentially viewed it as an evil spirit because they understood what it could do in a negative way. I also appreciate the second point that you mentioned regarding altitude sickness. I appreciate you mentioning lack of strategic clarity leads to tactical frustration. That is so important.
Mhm.
There's so much wisdom in that, that a lot of these climbers are clinging to their tools. Such a powerful analogy. Thank you. And then the third and final point, which is my big takeaway, is that belief management. You mentioned that humans have this need for safety. We really want safety, and it could be to our detriment. So thank you
Mhm.
so much for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. I very much appreciate just learning from you. So thank you. If
Oh,
people want to
thank
get
you.
more information on you, what you do, they want to reach out to you, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
What's interesting, we just uploaded a PDF. People are saying, well, how do I bust these myths that you're exposing? What are some of the things we can do? Well, I have a Mythbuster
Nice.
download. You can go to sagaleadership.com, like the Vikings, the saga, SAGA, sagaleadership.com. And it should be a download button right there. So enjoy.
Perfect. All right. I will include that in the show notes. People can just click, download that PDF right from there.
Great.
Thanks again. I appreciate your time. It's been awesome speaking with you today.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.